Hello, and welcome to Templar on the Run, the podcast pulling back the veil of Freemasonry and shining its light wherever we can. This is Brother Bryce Baker with
Brother Wayne Ross, and we are both from Meridian 47 in Meridian, Idaho. Thank you for your interest in the world's oldest fraternity.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Templar on the Run. This is again Brother Bryce Baker here with
Brother Wayne Ross from Meridian 47, and just real quick, as we can see now, there is a face to Brother Bryce. It is no longer blocked by the microphone. Please excuse us. That was our first run at trying to do this via video, so I think it came in pretty good, but just give you some more FaceTime this time around. And, we have a very special guest with us today, but before we get to that, we had and have a very crazy couple of weeks. We had a party at our building, and just really want to thank again our sponsors that we had coming out that day for us. Trillium Financial, Jason Harmon with Amherst Madison for sponsoring and giving us the funds to do what we did. The Vault, Basilio's Tacos Trucks, Potter Wines, and of course Classic Vinyl for coming out and playing for 2 hours in the parking lot and disturbing the peace of our neighborhood right across the street here from Unbound. So just wanted to thank everybody for that once again. And then Brother Bryce, you went to Grand Lodge, so you had an eventful understanding, I think, for some of that stuff, and we'll probably talk about that on another episode. And then we've got next weekend a huge event with Oktoberfest here in downtown Meridian, and we're all prepping for that to get that all out of the way. So needless to say, it's been a crazy couple of weeks. Are you feeling good and ready?
Yeah, I think this is kind of what keeps our lodge alive, just community involvement and fellowship, just doing something for the brothers, and doing something for the people that we can.
And speaking of fellowship and extending that, as I've said multiple times, this whole purpose to this podcast is looking for connections, right? Just seeing what everybody has in common and focusing on those, because we see so much negativity, and we read so much negativity, and we just got called out by the former member of Motley Crue for Freemasons being evil incarnate and in legal documents, which is sort of odd, but hey, that's what happens. So, but without any further ado, we have a very special guest here, the Very Reverend Sean Wall from St. Michael's in downtown Boise. Thank you for joining us.
Gentlemen, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
When we were talking at Lodge, one of our other brothers, Anthony, who was on here previously, he gave us the information, and we've contacted a couple of times with each other, and you've been, let's do this thing. So we're very appreciative about that, having that opportunity just to talk with you, find out more, because even in our conversation, I was confused. I thought St. Michael's was a Catholic church, and then you started to give me some of the history, and so we really want to be able to get into that and all those different particulars, and saw some things online, some commonalities already that I noticed there. So the first thing first, the title. What is the Very Reverend?
The Very Reverend. Well, for centuries upon centuries, clergies have been known as clergy members, priests primarily, because women have only been ordained to the priesthood for probably the last 40 or 50 years. We're known as the Reverend, and most churches are hierarchical, so your regular parish priest would be the Reverend. I am the Dean of St. Michael's Episcopal Cathedral, and with that comes the title the Very Reverend. Deans of seminaries are also Very Reverend. The bishops in the Episcopal Church are known as the Right Reverend. And then, for instance, our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, who some may know from preaching at the wedding of Meghan and Harry, he is known as the Most Reverend. So it's just part of our hierarchical nomenclature that every organization has. I'm sure you guys in the Masons have that as well.
Yep, we sure do. As a dean, so do you have responsibility over the downtown space as far as any kind of like tracking of members, or are you like a major part of one of the committees that runs the actual physical building, or is that something somebody else does that stuff?
Well, probably the easiest way to characterize it for people who aren't Episcopalians, is I'm the head pastor. So my job at St. Michael's is to handle all the pastoring things that need to be done, from leading worship and offering pastoral care, and making sure that the steps get shoveled in the wintertime and so on. There is another priest on the way to St. Michael's. We are previous canon, which is the title of the associate priest at a cathedral, moved on to a new job, and we have the replacement coming. So she and I will take care of all the priestly duties at St. Michael's.
And how long have you been there?
I've been there just about 2 years.
Oh, okay.
But, I mean, we have a fun connection, my wife and I. My wife is a graduate of Boise High School. I grew up in McCall. We went to University of Idaho. And then I joined the Navy and was an officer in the Navy for 20 years. And we lived elsewhere. And then I went to seminary after I retired and became a priest. And I had a church in Portland, Oregon. And this opportunity came up. And my wife, who's a partner in a CPA firm, had learned through the pandemic that she can work anywhere. We hadn't imagined we'd be able to leave Portland, and the stars just aligned for us, and we could come back to St. Michael's, where she went to church and high school, and where we were married, and so it was a bit of a homecoming for us.
That's cool.
And we're really grateful to be here.
That's awesome. So, how long did it take you to get to your position then? After you went through the seminary, or after you were in the Navy, I guess?
So I was not involved in ministry at all in the Navy. I had another specialty. So when I retired from the Navy, I had to go through a relatively lengthy process of discerning a call to ministry. The Episcopal Church has a pretty well-defined concept of how to discern that call and to determine that the folks that we are sending to seminary are actually called to ministry. That took me maybe 18 months or so, and then I went to seminary to get a Master of Divinity degree, which took 3 years, and following that I had to wait 6 months to be ordained to the priesthood. In the interim, I was ordained as a transitional deacon, which is just a stop along the way to continue to be formed as a priest. And then I was ordained to the priesthood in January of 2014, so I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary of ordination. And I was at my previous church for 8 years, and now here I am.
So some men take up whittling when they retire. Sounds like you took up something a little bit steeper of an endeavor there.
Well, that retirement from the Navy thing's a little misleading. I was 42. It certainly wasn't time to sit in a rocking chair, and I couldn't be more grateful that the Holy Spirit intervened in my life and called me to this. I'm a cradle Episcopalian. I come from a family of priests, but I wouldn't have imagined this. If you would have talked to me when I was 22, if I would be sitting here now with a collar on, I would have laughed out loud at you.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, for those of us not acquainted with that, could you define for us Episcopalian and maybe, the split, the break-off, or however that history developed?
Yeah. It's a fascinating story, and I mean, people do probably whole TV programs and a series on this type of thing, so just smack me if I start to ramble on. Certainly interrupt with questions, but I think almost everybody's heard of Henry VIII. Certainly part of our history classes were in school. Henry VIII was a good Catholic. In 1521, Pope Leo X defined him as a defender of the faith. This is happening in the face of Martin Luther, who's pounding his 95 Theses on the church door, and the Reformation was in full force. And the Reformation was not intended to create different churches, but to reform the Catholic Church, to bring them back into a more biblically centered experience than some people thought was happening, Martin Luther among them. Henry VIII, as I said, was a good Catholic, but he had a problem. He wanted a son to carry on his monarchy, and he was married to Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Columbus fame from Spain. And although they'd been married many years, she had not had a successful birth of a boy child, and had many miscarriages and children who died in infancy. And at some point, Henry VIII just decided it wasn't going to happen, and he needed to get a new wife. So Anne Boleyn was a lady in waiting for Catherine of Aragon, and he and Anne Boleyn strike up a relationship. She ends up pregnant. He wants and needs to marry her, but he has to have the Pope's permission to get divorced, which the Pope wasn't anxious to give for a number of reasons, not the least of which was Catherine of Aragon's nephew was Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who had taken up residence in Rome. So the Pope kind of needed to make sure he was on Charles V's good side.
Right, don't want to be
Yeah.
stepping all over what he's got going on.
Yeah. So he says no annulment. Well, like any petulant child, what do? When someone tells you no, you take your ball and go home. So Henry VIII said, fine, I'll just start my own church. And Parliament played along, and in 1534, Henry VIII was made the supreme leader of the Church of England, and therefore could give himself permission to have an annulment. So he did, in fact, annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and married Anne Boleyn. And then he went through, Anne Boleyn and 4 wives after that, and we all know Henry VIII and his wives.
Yeah.
But that was the beginning of the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church. And from there comes the Episcopal Church, and there's a lot of history that would be fun to dig into if we get around to it still.
So yeah, I had a question because Brother Bryce has been doing a lot of reading, a lot of work on Francis Bacon, and we were looking at some stuff with that, and they had him labeled as Anglican. So Church of England, Anglican, Episcopal, all same-ish, or?
Well, Church of England and Anglican are the same.
Okay.
Anglicanism is rooted in the Church of England.
Okay.
Now, there's an Anglican communion that's grown to embrace churches around the world that look to the Archbishop of Canterbury as our ceremonial head. The Archbishop of Canterbury doesn't have authority over other churches in the Anglican communion other than the Church of England, but we are all joined together in common cause. So when you think of Church of England, think of Anglicanism. But when you think of the Episcopal Church in the United States, we think of ourselves as Anglicans, although we are most definitely not part of the Church of England, which is an unavoidable result of being in revolution against England.
Right,
Yeah.
It was really difficult for the American revolutionaries to be in the Church of England while actively rebelling against the crown in England.
right.
So the Episcopal Church grows directly out of the Anglican Church or the Church of England, but it has to be separate and different because it just wasn't possible to continue to be in direct relationship. And in fact, the first bishop for the Episcopal Church, consecrated in 1784, was consecrated by Scottish bishops because you have to have 3 bishops make a new bishop, and there was no way in the world that any Church of England bishops were going to come here or we were going to go there
Right.
and have someone consecrated. So that's how you come to have the Episcopal Church, but we are deeply tied to the Church of England. I mean, we'll talk more about this, I think, but the Book of Common Prayer that we use goes all the way back to that Reformation time with Henry VIII, and then following his death, his son, Edward VI, who really, it was during his reign that the Reformation of the English Church really got underway.
Yeah, I definitely want to hit on that because when I was doing some of the research, I was looking at it, there were multiple revisions of the Book of Common Prayer. So I was like, I want to, we'll touch back on that and look at that. And then I also thought I saw on some of the history too that it looked like a good number of some of the founding fathers were early in the Episcopal Church as well.
Yeah,
I
well,
think so.
American history is obviously complicated.
Right.
The people who came over on the Mayflower, the Puritans, they were running from the Church of England. So they arrive in Massachusetts, and you have in Massachusetts in colonial times a much more congregational, for lack of a better term, themed piety up there. People who, want to do things at the local level. Episcopal itself means bishop. So, the Anglican Church and the Episcopal Church are rooted in this hierarchy of bishops. But down in Virginia, for instance, I mean, that is a hotbed of English activity well prior to the Revolutionary War. You know, in the late 1600s, we have Williamsburg and Yorktown and those places where the Church of England is being imported directly into the colonies. And even now, the Diocese of Virginia is the largest Episcopal diocese in the country, I think. That may have changed, but last I knew that was the case. So right there in Virginia, where kind of the birthplace of American democracy, it's loaded with Anglicans. So we've had, I think, 11 presidents who were Episcopalians, all sorts of congressional leaders. Anglicanism was definitely an influential part of the founding of the country. Now there's some theological things around that are fun to wrestle with too, deism and so on, that we could get into.
Oh, definitely.
But Anglicanism definitely an active part of the early country for us in the United States.
Yeah. So I kind of want to know more about I think it was the bishop, he said, he had to go to Scotland to become one.
Correct.
Right. So how does that process kind of work? Because in that kind of telling, that reminds me very much of Prince Hall Freemasonry, who he was a Mason, but in order to start a new lodge, he had to go basically to Ireland to get that kind of charter. So it's kind of a similar story.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, yet we have this thing called apostolic succession, which the Roman Catholics have as well, and they don't actually believe that we as Anglicans have apostolic succession. But to make a bishop, you have these 3 bishops lay hands on the new bishop, and those 3 people had 3 sets of hands laid on them, all the way back to Jesus, is the tradition. So that there has been this succession from the apostles through bishops over 2 millennia to current bishops today. And we can't have our Episcopal Church with our bishops if we don't have that consecration by the 3 Scottish bishops who allowed us to continue apostolic succession. And then those bishops, once they are confirmed, they make priests. So the whole house of cards is built on those 3 bishops in Scotland consecrating our guy Samuel Seabury in 1874.
Nice. Yeah, there's just so much as you really start to try to unravel history, or even in just like a cursory look as you're trying to figure out where everything lays out. That's a lot of what we do in our organization, coming from the Grand Lodge of England, 1717, and developing those things over, and then the Revolution having such a huge impact, on all those different types of things that people do find. And then, like you do mention, with deism and some of those founding fathers' beliefs, and still that it comes down to like what we talk about a lot, at least Bryce and I, just that root understanding of purpose, that root understanding of something that's guiding you, or that this all has meaning, it all has the reason, and you find that out as you go. So it's just always interesting when we get a deeper insight, of the things that we may just have little touches on here and there.
Yeah.
Things like that are just totally awesome. One of the other things that I was looking at, we talked briefly about that with the early American members, and then the church history. So Puritans, they're trying to get away from the Church of England, so they're trying to get away from everybody in general, right? So they're just, when they decided they were going to come over here, that was the biggest split for them, was to be able to do that, right?
Right. Yeah, they'd spent time in Holland, and they're just having a hard time fitting in anywhere. I mean, the word Puritan has a connotation in the English language. It comes from a place. They had a definite view on how people should conduct themselves and how their worship should be conducted, and it was at odds with the practice of religion in the Church of England. So that leads to a certain flavor of religion in the Northeast in the colonial time. You know, interesting stuff. And you know, now, you know, we can look and see some things that have carried over time, and some ways how some of those traditions have fallen away. It's an interesting study in human nature, I think.
Yeah, it is, definitely. Definitely it is. So many technical difficulties today. One of the things also that looking through the different pieces and speaking with you on the phone that I found very interesting was also St. Michael's connection to early Boise and the hospital system as well, right?
Yeah.
As far as one of those.
St. Michael's has been around for a very long time. We had the first services at the Boise Episcopal Church in 1864. Boise is just becoming an organized place at that time. And we were founded by a pioneer priest who had been doing work in the Willamette Valley over in Oregon, and headed this way and founded the Boise Episcopal Church and really settled in. I think he was on his way, you know, maybe to really planting roots here. Unfortunately, he jumped on a ship and went through the Panama, or went across the Isthmus of Panama, and started traveling east in the Gulf of Mexico and died in Key West, where he's buried within a year or two after founding the church. His name was Saint Michael Fackler. His parents were pretty aspirational. I don't know if I'd want to bear the weight of being named Saint right out of the womb. So most churches that are named St. Michael's are named after St. Michael the Archangel.
Right.
We are literally named after a guy named St. Michael. So
I don't feel too bad about my confusion then.
yeah. So they named the church after him, St. Michael's, in like 1865, 1866 time frame. And we just continued to grow. And in 1899, 1900, the foundation is started for our current cathedral, which is located at 8th and State, across the street from the Capitol, 16 or 17 years before the Capitol was built. And in 1902, we had our first services there at the St. Michael's Episcopal Cathedral. And it is a beautiful space, and it has done some important things in the Boise Valley. St. Luke's was started by the Diocese of Idaho, which was essentially St. Michael's for much of the late 19th century. Also, Boise State University is rooted in St. Margaret's Girls' School that was founded by St. Michael's. So, you know, we proudly lay some claim to both the St. Luke's Hospital System and Boise State University. That those things came about because of the passion and effort of some good Episcopalians in the Boise Valley.
Yeah, and just, you know, walking around downtown and you walk by and, you know, it just has that feel of, you know, old Europe. It's really cool when you see that, especially with some of the modern things that they've done in downtown lately. So when we get this out, we'll make sure on Instagram that we hook in a lot of the pictures as well as the website so people can check it out. And then there's a whole thing about the stained glass restoration and some of the other things that they've been doing over there, right, in the past.
Well, you know, COVID was obviously an awful time, and a lot of terrible things came from it, but some good things did. You already mentioned that I probably wouldn't be here without COVID, but also it gave us an opportunity to spruce things up at St. Michael's, and this happened before I got here, but we couldn't be in church anyway. So we took out all the pews and had them refinished. We had the parquet floor refinished, the whole inside of the church painted, just a nice freshening up. And we also replaced the plexiglass covers that had been put over the stained glass in the 60s and 70s to protect them. You know, somebody wanted to throw a rock or something like that. It was just a layer of protection. But over the decades, they'd become yellowed and didn't let in much light and were very unattractive. And in late 2021 or the beginning of 2022, all of that old plexiglass was replaced with beautiful, crystal clear, protective glass, and the light comes in a beautiful way. We have a 1918 Tiffany stained glass window in our east transept, the only Tiffany window in all of the state of Idaho. And it's just glorious the way the light comes in through it. I was showing someone a couple days ago and they said, "Is that backlit?" No, that's just the sunshine.
Yeah.
So if you like stained glass, and especially if you like really rare and unique stained glass, I encourage you to stop by and take a look at the Tiffany windows, but also enjoy the rest of the stained glass in the church, because it's all beautiful.
We might have to do that to get some really good images.
Yeah.
You know, the ones I saw on the website are really good too, but you know, some of these the new devices, the way they can pull them out, just can hit some of those areas. And then too, like you said, it's very important if they were covered in the 60s or 70s, you know, the materials, the building materials we have now that will allow that, you know, just in those kind of little upgrades. And that's a lot of what we are working through over here is, you know, trying to, you know, keep the building and upkeep it, and then, you know, make it, you know, much more of a viable kind of a space.
Yeah,
you know?
well, I think one of the gifts that we receive in having these older buildings is the opportunity to care for them in a faithful way, to try and keep their original character as much as we can. So it's a privilege to be at St. Michael's and to care for that space.
Have you been over there, Brother Bryce? I know you're.
I've walked by it.
You're around a
I
lot
haven't been
over
like
there.
in it though.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a beautiful building for sure.
Have to make a little detour in there. So
Yeah.
it's pretty open during the week, right? I mean, there's usually.
Well, I mean, since COVID, it's harder to get into, but I have a key, so I can always get you in.
Yeah.
I can also say for you and for anybody who's listening, you know, every Saturday and Sunday, 5:30 Saturday, 8 and 10 in the morning on Sunday, we're wide open. Come on in.
Of course. And a bunch of our images are all from different podcasts or different things that we've done. And this one in particular, we've got our brothers over in France there with their Shakespeare Lodge and their Shakespeare banner. And then we had the Templars and all the different kind of connections. And, you know, both Bryce and I really love history. And for us, it's murky. Our foundations are like super murky. You know?
The Masonic foundations?
Yeah, because there's so much that we use today. We understand the language and where it comes from and the different kind of pieces. And then, you know, but there's just so many gaps of history. So it's awesome when you were talking about the bishops and that structure, right? Because that is like true continuity, right? That's like a foundation piece. It's never going to go away for you guys. So that to me is super cool to have that idea and that aspect. And to me too, when you were talking about that a little earlier, made it sound like it was a little different because, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the regular Catholic side, in the past at least, it was always like a divine right of the king, or the, you know, I don't remember what they call it.
Well, the divine right of kings, I think, is rooted in something a little bit different. I'm no expert on that, but, you know, monarchs needed some way to justify their power.
Yeah.
And, you know, pre-Enlightenment, the easiest way to do that was to say, well, God made me king or queen.
Right.
So I think that was rooted in something different than Catholicism or Anglicanism, but they both used it. I mean, even now, I think that King Charles, when he became, he's not consecrated, what do they call it when he becomes king? I can't remember, it just happened.
Coronated.
When he had his coronation. Thank you. You know, there's all sorts of talk in there about how this is a divine appointment.
Yeah.
So, you know, even now, when I'm not sure anybody buys it, it's still part of the tradition.
Right. Yeah. We were over in England a couple summers back and got a very different perspective, and, you know, and just an understanding of how, you know, London operates and how the monarchy works with the parliament and, you know, all these other different kinds of things that we don't have here, you know. So I just imagine just in the past, those pieces with the monarch and the church, and, you know, just moving forward with the people, you know. And for so long, You know, there was just that education and those pieces were kept in-house. You know, only so many people. And then, like you mentioned, the Enlightenment, you know, comes around and knowledge is spread in the printing press, and people can read things and they can start to form their own ideas, you know,
Right.
and start to develop that. And I think that feels to me like, you know, what you guys have going on in the Episcopal Church is you know, pretty much in line with what we have as our own structure. You know, generally our listeners are Masons, or some people trying to figure it out for the first time or whatever. But the core to being a Mason, you have to believe in something bigger.
Yeah.
So we don't ever label it that way. You know, we've got brothers from all different denominations. So, and that's just sort of, for me in particular, that's some of the beauty of it, that we get to spend time and share and learn from others with all different kind of backgrounds, but we still have a guiding principle. You know, we know that there's something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
So, you know, at least that's a reassurance that when we meet other Masons, that should be their foundational piece as well. So, but it really sounds like, in looking at it, and you know, even a lot of the names, it sounds like we stole some of the office titles, you know, for, because I saw on there you've got some wardens on the website. I saw some warden names, and
Yeah.
stewards. We have stewards, we have deacons, we have wardens, and you know, in that kind of an aspect. So
Yeah, well, it feels to me, and I'm not familiar with Masonic history, but it all comes out of that same milieu, you
Yeah.
know, of people who are in a cultural time where to not be religious was unacceptable.
right.
So maybe if people didn't have a fully formed spirituality, they still kind of had to live the life. So it's not surprising to me that a lot of Masonic tradition seems to include some formal religious tradition as well.
Right. Yeah, and teaching to a certain extent, you know, being able to rely on some other pieces, and you know, like I said, where when we've got different parts of our ceremonies, we're taking parts straight from the Bible. One of the only two sources that we directly reference is from the Bible, and we try to make people understand that that's intentional.
Yeah.
They weren't just closing their eyes in the 1700s and picking passages, right? So we try to communicate that too, that it's purposeful,
Yeah.
what we do and how we do it, kind of a thing. So one of our brothers, one of our new guys, sent some questions. We were just ping-ponging last night. So he wanted to know if there was ceremonially any kind of description, and Bryce and I are really good at not saying stuff we're not supposed to say about our organization in here as well. But are there some really, or what's the best way to put it, what do you think is the most special part, magnificent part of any of the services that you guys do? I mean, is there a certain part that you really enjoy? You know, could be a regular Sunday service, or a wedding, or another event, or anything like that. Is there something that you really, really enjoy doing yourself personally?
Well, over the 10 years, it's come to a great surprise to me that I really enjoy all of it. You know, like I said, if you would have told me when I was 22 that I was going to be a priest, I would have scoffed openly. And even as I was being formed, I didn't have any doubt that I was called, but it was really kind of an adventure. Where was this all headed?
Mm-hmm.
And I found that I enjoy it, and I think I'm actually competent at it too, which is equally surprising to me in some ways. So I really enjoy doing it all. And one of the special things about the Episcopal Church, and not limited to the Episcopal Church, but we are rooted in both Word, that being the Bible, and in sacrament. And our two primary sacraments are Holy Communion, where we share in the bread and the wine that for us contain the real presence of Jesus. And we don't have to define real presence, it's a mystery. One of the beautiful things about faith is that when we don't have an answer, we can go, I wonder about that too.
Yeah.
So I think our sacramental life, sharing in communion and in baptism, which is the other primary sacrament, and in trying to open Scripture to people through preaching. I enjoy all of those things very much. And I really think it's what, as a priest, is what I'm called to try and make Scripture accessible, and then to share the sacraments that remind us of the sacrifice of Jesus, and to also make that accessible in a way that people take something away with that when they head home on a Saturday evening or a Sunday morning.
And to communicate that like we do, I'm sure it takes some time and some practice, because you don't want to come off flat.
Yeah.
Right? You're doing this, especially like baptism or something. That's not about you, right? That's about that person now. So I'm sure it takes a good amount of dedication and preparation on your part, no matter how many times you've done it.
Yeah, I think it's having my mind right in the moment, because one of the wonderful things for Episcopalians, and one of the most confusing things for people who aren't Episcopalians, is we are a liturgical church. We're rooted in liturgy. We talked about the Book of Common Prayer before, the first one, which was produced in 1549. And the Church of England, their official version of the Book of Common Prayer is the 1662 version. Like that is the book for the Church of England. Now they use other resources, obviously, but that's still the official book. For the Episcopal Church, we use the 1979 prayer book. That's the most recent iteration. There are multiple supplements, and maybe sometime there'll be a new prayer book, but in our fractured times, things like a prayer book are hard to come around on agreement on. But where I'm going with all this is we have a liturgy for baptism. So you say it's not about me, the priest, it's about the liturgy. And I get to live into that liturgy as I share it with the congregation. And the person who's being baptized, Brother Anthony, who I was able to baptize a few months ago, he comes to me as an adult and expresses his desire to be baptized. And we, using the liturgy, baptize him in the same way or generally the same way that millions upon millions of Episcopalians have been baptized over time. So it can't be about me, because I have this beautiful book that's 500 years old, and there's a lot of similarity between that 1549 prayer book and our 1979 prayer book. I have this beautiful liturgy that does all the work and lets the Holy Spirit come and be a part of it. So it's special in that it's not about anybody. It's not even really about the person who's being baptized. It's about the mystery of baptism happening right there for that person in front of a congregation.
And then you sort of mentioned that too. I was noticing when I was looking online at the revisions. Was that just for time changes, through the time, things change in society, or was it just, editing purposes? Because it looked like there was multiple.
Well, those early prayer books, 1549 is 2 years after Henry VIII died, and his son, Edward VI, had become king. Well, Edward VI was 9 when he became king, so he obviously was king in name only. He had a regency council that basically handled the business of state and the business of religion, because the king or queen of England is the head of the Church of England, even now. King Charles is the head of the Church of England. So they're trying to wrestle, especially after the death of Henry VIII, what it looks like to be a Reformed church. Not to be Catholic, but to actually be moving towards the things that Martin Luther was talking about. So I think as they wrestle with that, that's how you get a couple of iterations of the prayer book in the Church of England. In the American prayer book, even though there's more than a thread, there's a rope of continuity through those prayer books, from the first prayer book in 1789 through the 1979 prayer book. Just some theological understandings changed. The language obviously changed a little bit. We broadened out the Eucharistic prayers. Those are the prayers we use during communion to consecrate those elements of bread and wine. And from the 1928 prayer book, which is the previous prayer book to 1979, we focused more on this baptismal ecclesiology, or the focus of the church being the sacrament of baptism that invites people into the community. So that's probably the most substantial difference between the 28 prayer book and the 79 prayer book, is a renewed focus on baptism. Although, as I say, that the thread of continuity between the 1549 prayer book and the 1979 prayer book is solid. Like, you can go and read things that, except for changes in language, are essentially the same.
Yeah. Which, again, to us, that's awesome.
Yeah, we like continuity as Masons. You know, we've got a similar kind of book of stuff that we go through for our kind of ceremonies, and yeah, it's been unchanged. And even scripts that have been found beforehand, there's still that solid kind of connection.
Yeah.
And just that connection over time is just something special, you know. And something you keep saying too is mystery, right? And that's a big thing in Masonry as well. And it's that mystery that I think the mystic tie that kind of binds us all together, no matter what sect or religion or anything any brother Mason is from. You know, that's kind of what we meet and agree upon. So.
Right.
Yeah, it's also like when we bring a new brother in, and when they're a candidate and their first time through, it's always that conversation I like to have with them, is saying, you know what, after they're done, it's like, you just said what George Washington said.
Yeah.
Word for word. Ben Franklin, Mozart, you know, take your list, right? It's like, it sort of impresses on the mind. It's like, yeah, because we call it like, it's a space outside of your real world.
Right.
It is nothing like what we live in 2023.
Yeah.
When you go in there, and whether it's a business meeting or it's a degree or whatever it is way out of our normal daily context. You know?
Yeah.
Because we're like taking that time to really focus on that thing that makes us, that we think makes us better, you know. And I'm sure that's like the same kind of spirit you feel, you know, in service.
But I would argue that it sounds like the Masons and spirituality or worship are seeking to achieve the same thing, which is to take us out of our everyday life for a second and broaden our minds a little bit to what it is like to believe in a higher power. You know, for Episcopalians, that's belief in God and the belief that Jesus was crucified and died and resurrected for our salvation. But it makes us consider things beyond the stuff that eats up most of our bandwidth.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, because we can get pretty insular, pretty self-focused, if we don't have something to help break through that shell.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great thing that the church and the Masons share in that invitation to look at something more than ourselves.
Yeah, definitely too. And one of the other pieces I was reminded of too, you know, we say within Masonry we have two major patron saints, John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. Episcopalian, do you guys have anything in particular for either one? Do you, is there any kind of, I don't know, because I know we have specific days for both of them, but is there any kind of connection that you guys point out to any of those biblical characters or anything like that? Or
Well, you know, we have a strong affinity for all the biblical characters. One of the victims of the Reformation, if you want to call it that, is the Reformed churches have much less of a focus on the saints than the Catholics do. And that's in no way intended to be an attack on the Catholics. That's how their theology has developed over 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And as the Reformed churches moved away, and the Episcopal Church, by the way, we haven't really talked about this, the Episcopal Church is certainly a Protestant church, which is what came out of the Reformation, were the Protestants. But we are kind of in the middle. The Elizabethan Compromise, which happened with Elizabeth I, who really kind of got the Church of England established after the upheaval of Henry's death and Edward VI, and then Mary I, who was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon and therefore a Catholic. You've heard of Bloody Mary? Well, that's Bloody Mary. She, in fact, made sure that Thomas Cranmer, who wrote that 1549 prayer book, went to the stake and was burned there. So Elizabeth I follows her sister Mary I and gets things settled for the church. And the way it is settled is this thing called the via media, the middle way, the Elizabethan compromise. And it sets the Church of England between the Protestants and the Catholics. So there's so much similarity between the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, because that stuff wasn't thrown out in the way it was in some more Reformed faiths. But things like the veneration of saints is not really an Anglican thing. So we do practice patronal saint day, feast days. Like I already mentioned that St. Michael Fackler, the man, is who we're named after, but the feast day for St. Michael the Archangel was September 29th. So just, that was yesterday, right?
Yesterday, yeah.
We celebrated it a couple weeks ago because we had another event to combine it with. But almost every Episcopal church that's named after a saint will celebrate their patronal feast day. So St. Barnabas was my previous church in Portland. The feast day for St. Barnabas, I think, is June 15th. So sometime around June 15th, we'll celebrate that. So that was a long answer to a really short question.
No.
That's what we're all about.
Yeah. Trust me. This is like right up our alleyway.
Yeah.
For some of our listeners too. Others have already turned it off.
Yeah, the ones who are sleeping, I'm sorry. Hoping that was good.
It is too. It's just there's just so much, to be learned from, I believe, from all the different organizations and different faiths, and just being able to get that understanding from somebody who's so immersed in it is huge, right? And you're not giving it a tint or anything like that, or just this is, or pushing one way or another. You just got this way about you where it's just makes it easy to understand that, this is what we believe and this is why we believe, the way that we do. So, which is really awesome. Probably puts a lot of people at ease, especially because like we like to talk about is, when people are searching, and they're afraid to walk in the door or to, just to come inside and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I can imagine you have a very calming demeanor with
Well,
people. So
thank you. And I try to. Some of it's just hiding the fact I'm a knucklehead. So, but the Episcopal Church, you've probably seen signs that say the Episcopal Church welcomes you, and it's really not intended to be a slogan. I mean, we want to be a place where people can walk in and feel welcomed, no matter where they are on their faith journey or what they believe.
Right.
In fact, one of the things you mentioned we might talk about is who are some famous Episcopalians, and one I always like to bring up is our man Robin Williams.
Oh yeah.
God rest his soul. He was a good Episcopalian, and he's got the top 10 reasons why you should be an Episcopalian. You guys have any interest in hearing them?
Let's
Sure.
do it.
I
Yeah.
brought them for you.
Oh, perfect.
The number 10 reason to be an Episcopalian: no snake handling. Number 9, you can believe in dinosaurs. Number 8, male and female, God created them. Male and female, we had ordained them. That's because, some churches, as you might know, don't have female priests.
Right.
Number 7, you don't have to check your brains at the door. Number 6, pew aerobics. Yes, we stand, kneel, and sit a lot. Number 5, the church year is color-coded. We have liturgical seasons of the year. Each season has a different color. Number 4, free wine on Sunday. But just a sip. All the pageantry, none of the guilt.
There you go.
Maybe again a reference to some of our Catholic friends. Number 2, you don't know how to swim to get baptized. We don't do much immersion baptism in the Episcopal Church. And according to Robin Williams, the number 1 reason to be an Episcopalian, no matter what you believe, there's bound to be at least one other Episcopalian who agrees with you. So
That's awesome.
what Robin Williams was saying really is that all people are welcome, and most people can find a church home,
Yeah.
as long as they're welcoming too.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we don't necessarily, other than some core tenets, we don't affirm a whole lot that's going to make someone want to stay because they feel like their particular view is affirmed.
Right.
I like to call it the big tent. I want people on the left and the right of the political spectrum to be able to sit down in church for an hour on Sunday morning and have a worshipful experience and approach each other with Christly love, and then they can go home and do whatever they do on the internet after that.
Yeah. That's good. I like that. What are some other famous Episcopalians off the top of your head?
Well, Wayne mentioned George Washington. He was an Episcopalian, and if you've ever been in many of the Episcopal churches in the Washington, D.C. area, he was a member of all of them, which is probably not true, but it's wonderful the way every Episcopal church in Northern Virginia lays claim to him.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, there are 11 presidents who were Episcopalians. George Herbert Walker Bush was the latest of those. He had a wonderful Episcopal burial at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. President Ford was an Episcopalian. Obviously, George Walker Bush was an Episcopalian when he was a kid, but he became a Methodist. So he'll have to work that out with God when the time comes.
Open up the book, right?
That's funny.
You know, I actually did a little internet search because you guys wanted me to ask this question. There's an enormous list of names on the internet that the internet claims are Episcopalians.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't have any idea, really.
Yeah,
So,
of course. Yeah.
the current governor of Idaho is an Episcopalian.
Oh, there you go.
He goes to church in Emmett.
Oh, cool.
Goes to Emmett.
He's from Emmett.
Yeah. You think he'd be like, well, it's a little closer from over here, so.
Yeah, he comes to St. Michael's occasionally.
Yeah.
So,
That's cool.
yeah.
Oh, there's Brother Bryce again. He had his first cage fight a couple
Oh my
months back.
gosh. Holy shnikes, we'll have to talk about that.
It was a good time.
How did you get on that path?
I got bored with hockey and wanted to try something else.
Hockey without pads and sticks?
Yeah, pretty much. It was
Well,
a good time.
Congratulations. That I prized my nose too much, I think. I want to get that thing broken.
Yeah, well, it's still there so far.
Yeah.
So I still got all my teeth too, so I just must be lucky.
You wear a mouth guard for that, I presume?
For that, yeah.
Yeah,
Hockey,
yeah.
rarely.
And it's really lightweight gloves, right? You're not barefisted or anything.
Yeah, this one was like a pretty amateur, so they're a bit bigger than even like your normal ones.
Okay.
They're like 6 ounces. Normally they're like 4 ounces. But
Okay.
yeah, still hurts.
This
Yeah,
guy
oh,
behind it, you can see the small glove that he's wearing up there.
Oh, yeah.
And then when they fight, they wear shin pads and a cup, of course, and a mouthpiece, and that's
Nice.
all they wear.
Yeah. So how did that go?
He won.
Nice.
He keeps saying at exhibition he took two out of the 3 rounds. So
Thank you.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a
Good for you for
blast.
being a tough guy.
I'm just out there have fun.
yeah, it's a different lifestyle. That's another connection that we have. I was an instructor in Muay Thai kickboxing for years.
Okay.
And then when we moved here, I worked with a lot of the local teams and worked as a corner guy, and just worked on what I do as far as the kicking styles and stuff, and then all the other stuff they do on the ground. It's just it doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't. No, I was always the upright guy. So
Yeah, I was a wrestler in high school, so the stuff on the mat is far more my thing than getting kicked in the face.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we always like to showcase some of the different groups and the people that we've been able to talk to, and it's been awesome. We've been doing, is this number 16 today? Is this 15?
I think it's 14.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm not even sure what we've done.
We've done some mini episodes, so maybe it's like the 15, 16.
Yeah,
I don't know.
could be. But one of the things that I remark about, and it's sort of cool that we have listeners like all over the country. And just, when I was growing up especially, that wasn't possible. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And-
AM radio from who knows where in the middle of the night.
Exactly. So being able to do this in this aspect, just being able to reach out, and then, like I said, to have you on here and others who can talk, and let people know, even just a brief little bit of the information can become a spark for somebody.
Right.
And that's hugely important to us, not just in Masonry, but, in the world in general. So.
Well, I appreciate the invitation to come and talk to you all about St. Michael's and the Episcopal Church. I mean, I'm obviously proud of both our church locally and the church historically, but it's just interesting history too.
No,
Yeah.
it is.
I think we might have to do a follow-up episode about like the revolutionary era specifically, and kind of all those connections, because there's a lot there.
Yeah.
With a lot of the founding fathers being Episcopalians, and then also Masons. So I think that'd be a cool follow-up.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what I feel, that there's a lot of that connection, because we can be honest, we do have some churches that we are on the blacklist of.
Yeah.
And even still by papal bull, I believe the Catholics are not supposed to join Masonic lodges still in that aspect, and so it's but for me, it's like just having the conversations. It's great just to have the conversations, and we started out doing this more focused into a lot of what we do in the lodges and try to take away that mystery.
Yeah.
As much as we can without getting in trouble. So
Yeah.
we haven't gotten in trouble. So
Not yet.
so we're doing good, But then, the Buddhist friend, because we couldn't call him a monk because he's not there yet, and he was sharing his experience in Tibet, and the pastor right next door, and now you having that on, and being able to develop these conversations are huge. I have told Brother Bryce it's something I've wanted to do within lodge, but you can't. It's because we don't talk about religion, we don't talk about politics.
Yeah.
So I need, this sort of has that feel, it gives that space, for that time, and also it allows that person who may be searching to go in and do that. So if somebody was listening and they were thinking about a particular, wherever they are, maybe the Episcopal Church, what would you say to somebody who's sort of on the threshold and thinking about it? What would be your best advice for them?
I think it's twofold. I would guess that most Episcopal churches have a website with some sort of online form or an email address. If someone sends me an email, I'm going to answer it. Ask me some questions. Tell me you'd like me to buy you coffee. I mean, I hate to say this on the internet, but I'm happy to buy coffee or lunch and sit down and talk to somebody.
Another thing we have in common. So that's what we do too.
So, faith is really about relationships. My sermon for tomorrow actually is about the fact that the Greek word for church, ecclesia, isn't about a building. Ecclesia means a gathering of people. So St. Michael's is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It's a gorgeous Gothic revival, 125-year-old place.
Right.
If you take the people out of it, it's just an empty building. It's not a church. So I want to be in relationship with people. And if they want to come be a part of our church, our gathering of people, then we'd love to have them, which is the next step. Come to church.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. We have 3 different flavors of service. Our Saturday service at 5:30 is pretty relaxed. It's got piano music. I don't put on vestments, and I have on the dress I wear. And,
Right.
it's not really a dress, but and then Sunday mornings at 8 we have a service with no music, and it's got traditional language, these and thous. And at 10 we light our hair on fire with a beautiful pipe organ and a guy who can play it really well, and occasionally we have the smells and bells, the incense, and all that kind of stuff.
Smells and bells.
So I would say, wherever you are in the world, if you feel a call to explore your faith, have the courage to go into a church. And if they don't treat you well, don't go back, because there's a church down the street that will.
Right.
So that'd be my advice.
Yeah, that's awesome, because that also hits on that idea that we also have, is that exact thing, that it's not about the building for us. I won't say for us, I'll say for me. It's not about the building, because if you don't have the brothers, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
It's the substance that we bring together. So one other thing I did ask you, and you're like, I don't know too many on that, but no resources you'd want to send anybody out to in particular, any books or websites?
Well, I mean, there is kind of a fun book.
The Bible?
Yeah, read the Bible.
That's a fun one.
I actually, I've taken on a practice of reading the Bible in a year. I've done it several times. So I just every night, I read whatever breakdown the book gives me. I literally buy books that are broken down to read it in a year. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I encourage people who want to explore the Bible to do it. If you crack open the Bible and start reading the first chapter of Genesis and you want to read the whole thing that way, you're going to get to about Exodus before you give it up.
Mm-hmm.
So read the Bible, that's great. But there's a book called the Episcopal Handbook. It's a very simple, not really cartoonish, but it's not a dense book. It's about like this, and it has great stuff in there about the Episcopal Church. I would also say for people who want to explore Scripture, there's a series of books by a guy named Bishop N.T. Wright, who was a bishop in the Church of England, and he's written a series of books called the New Testament for Everyone. So, it might be the Gospel of Matthew for everyone, or the Gospel of Mark for everyone, and they're little books with Bishop Wright's translation of the Scripture, and then commentary from him that's really down-to-earth, real-world stuff. And I think if you're interested in the Bible and want to take it in a way that's pretty digestible, that's a great way to do it. And the Episcopal website, the Episcopal Church website, also has great stuff on there. There's a glossary of terms, so if I've said some things today you're scratching your head wondering what I'm talking about, you can go to the Episcopal Dictionary and get some definitions. And I would say many Episcopal churches around the country have really comprehensive websites where you can find great stuff. Now, you can't check out every one, obviously, but you can start with ours at stmichaelscathedral.org and then move on from there and find other places. There are many other great churches here in the Boise Valley, St. Stephen's and All Saints in Boise, Holy Nativity here in Meridian, Grace in Napa, St. David's in Caldwell, St. James in Mountain Home. I mean, if you're interested in an Episcopal church, you can find one nearby.
Not hard to find.
Not hard.
Brother Bryce, I think we're getting near that time. Is there anything else that you have for the Very Reverend?
Well, like I said, I had a bunch of stuff about the American Revolution and like the Civil War I was kind of interested in, but as I said, we're kind of pushing up on the time here, so we might have to do something else here.
There was an Episcopal bishop who was a general in the Confederate Army, so that's not great.
Yeah. Well, I was I'll make it quick here, but I was reading that, the Southern Diocese, I think, kind of broke off from the larger branch of Episcopalian churches at that time, but then they were welcomed back once the war was over with no issue. I think I read something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there clearly become some problems of being in relationship when, a country's at war with itself.
Yeah.
So, not unlike, President Lincoln hoped to do before he was assassinated, and what continued on in some ways after Reconstruction or during Reconstruction is, how can we best meld ourselves back together as a whole country? I mean, there are obviously wounds and scars and a lot of awfulness, but I think the Episcopal Church's mindset, and I'm a little bit shooting from the hip here because seminary was a long time ago, but the idea was that we're stronger together than separated. So the churches in the Confederacy, as soon as the war is over, we figured out how we can integrate them back into the church as a whole. And dioceses, especially in the 19th century, are in many ways pretty independent places. The organized hierarchy of the American church in the United States with a presiding bishop that's elected and so on is probably a recent thing within the last 100 years or so. Before that, the presiding bishop was just the senior bishop. And even now, the presiding bishop doesn't have the kind of authority that the Pope would have to point his or her finger and get people to do what they want. It's more kind of the bully pulpit than actual raw power like the Pope has. So
that's interesting. Like I said, I got a million questions about that time. I love that time period, and I think that would be super cool to dive into. So we might have to do a follow-up. We might have to.
I'll have to crack open my seminary books, but we can certainly do some talking about it. I think it'd be fun.
Yeah, we'll give you a heads up.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, once again, appreciate your time coming out on a Saturday. I know you've got an event coming up just a couple hours, so appreciate taking the time to come over and join us on our little podcast here as we continue to try to grow and just pass some information on to people. So, and when we do that, Brother Bryce, you want to tell everybody where we're supposed to be found?
Well, yeah, you can hear us on Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Which is going away.
Yeah, it's going to be YouTube Music pretty soon.
Okay.
But we'll be, it's Templar on the Run there. On Reddit and Twitter, we're at Templar on the Run. Reach out to us there. You can send us questions. We'll post different things about our episodes and what else is going on. We're on TikTok as well at Templar on the Run. Our Instagram is at Temp on the Run, and we post pictures there about lodge happenings and other stuff, relating to our episodes and, just kind of what we're doing with our lodge. And then if you have any questions, you can email us at templarontherun@gmail.com.
Awesome. And once again, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean, Wayne.
Yep.
Everyone, thanks for listening.
Thank you all.
We'll
Have
see
a great
you.
weekend.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. All right, everyone, thanks for listening to Templar on the Run. Please check us out at Twitter and Reddit at Templar on the Run. Our Instagram is at Temp on the Run. We got TikTok at Templar on the Run. And if you have any questions or anything else that you can't reach us on any of those other platforms, please send them to templarontherun@gmail.com. We thank you for listening and have a great day.